It's nice to be here. I mean, I basically say anytime I get a chance to talk about grammar or fake news, I am there. I am there. I am there to do it. And David, since you are our in-person audience tonight, if there's something specific that you'd like to talk about, we can do that. Or I don't have to run through a bunch of slides. If you're more interested in something specific, you could let us know that.
Yeah, or for the later YouTube audience, I think.
Okay, yeah, all right, nothing specific. All right, well then, yeah, I mean, I've got a presentation kind of prepared, and just throw a question in the chat if you want me to stop. It's not, I mean, I'm not gonna get thrown off or anything. If you want to stop and go back over stuff, I've got some examples and I'm just kind of some explanations, and then we can look maybe at a couple of websites too, that are tools that you can use for this. So yeah, I have been in journalism for a long time, both practicing it and teaching it. And it's a very interesting time to be a member of the news media. Just the past, no, I wouldn't even say the past 4 years, but like the past decade with the new technologies and everything like that, and a lot of changes in media. It is definitely not the same industry that it was when I started in it 20 some years ago. And some of the changes are really good and some of the changes really aren't. And so, there's a need for us in the news media to kind of explain ourselves more than ever, because people don't automatically trust members of the media because there's a lot of bad actors out there too. And so what I want to do tonight is I want to talk about the practices that journalists follow to bring you news, and how journalists bring you reliable news, and what they go through to do that, and then some ways that you can help yourself by following reliable sources and checking things out and things like that. So that's kind of where we're going, what we're looking at here tonight. So let's talk about real news here. And how journalism will bring you accurate information. So yeah, I have a bunch of newspapers in a trash can. That's my graphic. Because traditional journalism, especially print, has undergone significant cuts in the past, I would say 15 years. Ever since the internet really got big, newspapers and the news media in general didn't really jump on that as quickly as they could have. And as a result, some not great things have happened to the whole news industry, including, which I think is the most important, not so much the profitability thing. Okay, yeah, newspapers were making profits hand over fist for a long time, and didn't really plan for how to keep doing that in the face of a changing media climate. But the problem that I think is most significant is that public trust in the media has fallen. It used to be that you could turn on the TV and watch Tom Brokaw, or pick up your morning newspaper, and you knew that what was in that, you knew that what you read in the newspaper, you knew that what you heard on the nightly news was legitimate, was what happened. And they were going to tell you what happened, and they were going to give you some facts about it, and it was going to be pretty straightforward, and then you would know. And people don't trust that anymore because there's a lot of other stuff out there. There's a lot of things competing for our attention. There's a lot more channels by which news is delivered. And so that means that we have to earn the trust in the news media, but it also means that consumers have an even greater need for reliable information. All right, they really need to be able to turn to outlets for information that they can trust, because there's so much out there that they can't. And both the good thing and the bad thing about the internet is that it lets anybody be a publisher. Okay, anybody can publish anything on the internet. Our technology lets anybody shoot photos and videos. In a lot of ways, this is a really good thing. It's really good that anybody can shoot photos and videos, because we've captured a lot of things that maybe wouldn't have been recorded before. George Floyd being one of them, that's really in the news right now. And people were recording what happened. So the facts are not necessarily in dispute there. We've got on video what happened from a couple of different people. So it's no longer the days of police just saying, well, they were resisting arrest and pulled a knife. And it's like, no, the video does not show that. So that's a good thing. it's a good thing that the internet lets a lot of voices that weren't previously heard be part of the conversation. That's a really positive development. The flip side of that, the dark side of that, is that anybody can publish anything on the internet, whether it is just incorrect information, whether it is conspiracy theories, deliberately false and misleading information, deliberately inflammatory information, that kind of stuff. There's a pathway for that too. And the same technology that lets anybody shoot photos and videos is now enabling people to fake photos and videos, to alter them digitally in such a way that it makes them look real, but they're really not. And so that's something that we all have to contend with. This is something that it's bigger than just the news media, that we all are going to be exposed to that more and more. And we've got to learn to be more savvy about that and be a little bit more of an active news consumer rather than just a passive receptor of information. And another thing about the internet too is that publications look far more similar digitally than they do in print or broadcast. Okay, I mean, it used to be that if you wanted to start your own newspaper, sure, anybody could start a newspaper, but you need paper and you need ink and you need someone to print it for you. You need somebody to distribute it or to take subscriptions. I mean, it was a pretty big undertaking. If you wanted to do that, you could start your own TV station, but you needed massive amounts of equipment and it was expensive to do that. And so, people who are doing that didn't do it lightly. You're not going to go through all that time and trouble to start a newspaper or a magazine just to spew a bunch of hate to a few people who may be willing to buy it or not, and then you're probably going to go under. But online, it doesn't really cost anything. And you've got the technology to make it look pretty slick. And then you share it on Twitter, and whether the New York Times shares something on Twitter or some, out there conspiracy theorist shares it on Twitter, it's in the same little box, in the same typeface, with the same setup with a picture and a headline and a link, and it all looks the same. And so that news from the New York Times is weighted equally on Twitter as crazy conspiracy theories. Okay, and so that's a disservice to legitimate, reliable news, and it puts more of the onus on the news consumer to think about that, to be skeptical about that, to check that out, to weigh that, to seek out reliable sources and follow those. Because social media is full of bad information, incorrect information, incomplete information, unreliable information, deliberately misleading information. It's full of it. However, a lot of people get their news, at least some of it, from social media, because there's a lot of legitimate media on social media as well. You can create a Twitter feed that's really good news sources, and you could get news only from Twitter and be really well informed. You could get into Twitter and have really awful information poured into your head too if you're not careful about who you follow. Same with YouTube. If you just click one thing on YouTube and then just click what it recommends, you could go down some really dark rabbit holes. And you want to be very careful about that. And a lot of that is that these algorithms are not necessarily curated by people. YouTube in particular, it's like you watch something about, cooking something, and then they're going to recommend you something somewhat adjacent to that, and then someone adjacent to that, but they're going to base it on things that have lots of views, that maybe have similar keywords, and it may be really, you may end up in the, I just made a dish with onions. Oh, here's how onions can cure cancer. Okay, maybe not so reliable. Maybe not reliable at all there. But you don't know because you're watching YouTube and they all look the same. They're all presented in the same way. All right. Because even back when, if somebody did want to start their own newspaper or their own magazine, if they didn't have professional designers and professional typesetters, it was going to look really amateurish. Think about Access TV. If you want to go way back to, Wayne's World and all that kind of stuff, Access TV looks really amateurish. And you can tell it's not really a professional job, but anymore the technology lets you make it look really professional. And again, so that's kind of where we are in terms of current media. We've got lots and lots and lots of competing channels. And we've got competing channels whose primary purpose is not to deliver reliable information, it's to make money. And it makes money by people engaging with content on there and spending lots of time on there and getting lots of ads in front of their eyeballs on there. All right, their mission is not presenting reliable information. Their mission is getting lots and lots of users to spend lots and lots of time on the site, because that's how they make lots and lots of money. All right, so those are not the same kind of mission. So how do you know? Just because something's new media doesn't mean it's unreliable. But just because it's on the internet doesn't mean it is reliable. You know, and like I said, it used to be you could pick up the newspaper and you pretty much knew that if you were picking up your daily newspaper, the news was pretty reliable. You know, they weren't going to fill it with junk. All right. Now, yeah, you can't just say, well, it's on the internet, it must be true. I know there are people who think that, but that's not true. People can put anything there. And the difference here is professional standards. Professional standards that journalists follow while they are gathering news for people. The Society of Professional Journalists has a code of ethics, lays out the standards of good journalism, and that is what distinguishes reliable journalism. There is a process, there are standards that you follow when you're gathering information, when you are checking out information, when you are putting it all together, ready to present to your audience so that they get the most accurate information. All right, and this isn't an easy kind of thing. I mean, people have to go to school to do this. People have to train for a while to do this. There are rules. Even though journalists aren't licensed by any kind of governing body, the SPJ Code of Ethics, I mean, newsrooms consider that a binding code of ethics. You know, and they will fire people who don't follow the code of ethics, who do unethical things, especially in the name of a professional publication. So what does this mean? This means at the very basic level of the SPJ Code of Ethics is seek truth and report it. Seek truth and report it. That's what it all boils down to. You find out what happened, you find the facts, and you let people know that. Okay, but there's a little bit more to it than that. Like, how do you do that? Okay, so you gather information from reliable sources. All right, we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. You attribute where you get information. Okay, where did this come from? I'm going to put something in a story. How do I know that? Who says? Where did I get that piece of information? How do we know that that's reliable? Okay, and you quote people accurately. All right. And that means that, you know, you don't quote people out of context. You give the whole picture. You don't make them look like idiots. You don't make them look more extreme than they really were. You give a quote that accurately represents what the person said. You explore all angles of a news event. And I say all, not both, because most news events have more than two sides. Some are pretty straightforward, like a car crash or something like that, you know, a house fire. You know, that's news, and there's not really a both sides to that because the house burned down. And we will tell you when it happened, and we will let you know that everybody got out of the house okay, including the pets. We will let you know that the fire chief on the scene said they weren't quite sure how it started, but they were going to investigate. We'll come back when they tell us what happened. And maybe if the fire department says, you know, people, make sure that you always, you know, put your chimeneas out when you go in at night, you know, don't leave them smoldering on your patio because they might be dangerous or something like that. Okay. This is a really important one. You follow the story. All right. You ask questions, you find out information, you ask more questions, you find out information. You start with a question. You don't start with a preconceived idea, because if you start with a preconceived idea, you get in pretty bad trouble. And does this mean all journalists are perfect and follow these rules? It does not. As a matter of fact, I've just given my advanced editing students an assignment for Monday, where they read a story that I call a train wreck because it started with a preconceived idea. And this is one that got past, it was a very sensationalistic story. It got past a bunch of editors, it got published, it got retracted almost immediately because upon further fact checking, the story kind of fell apart. It didn't happen exactly like the sources in the story said. The reporter didn't really check out what the sources said. And the publication got sued. There was some legal fallout there to that. And it pretty much happened because the reporter started with, this is a horrible problem and people have to know about it. Okay, there are horrible problems out there that people need to know about, but you don't start with that kind of an agenda. You start with a question. How does this happen? What do universities do about this thing? Why doesn't this work? What could be done to make this to work a little bit better? What do experts say about this? That is how you report a story like that. And then you check the facts and you verify the information, okay? And you check what sources tell you. Even if they're reliable sources, sometimes they make mistakes. That's why journalists check it out. One of the things that they used to sort of tell old school journalism students was, if your mother says she loves you, check it out. Now, of course, your mother loves you, right? But, I mean, it was just sort of like, yeah, even the most basic facts, check it out. Even if you're 99.99% sure you know it, check it just to make sure you're 100% sure you know that. And kind of on the other side of that, rumors, speculation, claims that you haven't bothered to check out, those aren't ready for publication, all right? Rumors and gossip, that isn't journalism. I mean, we love rumors and gossip as much as the next person, but we don't print those or publish those until we've actually verified that they're true. Because a lot of times they're really not true, or they're not 100% true. They're like partly true. There's like, oh, well, this happened, but it didn't blow up into this. Oh, there's this, but not that big a deal.
Lisa, maybe along these lines, we have a question actually in the chat.
Oh, great, thanks.
So is there a traditional definition of news that journalists use? David is asking. He says, I often feel that I read a lot of news, but that it seems to focus on bad things. And I wonder if that's really an accurate picture of what's happening.
I think sometimes it is because, sort of the way to talk about that is we don't report about the plane that doesn't crash, because planes are not supposed to crash. And so when a plane does crash, it's news. But yeah, we actually do. I mean, there's sort of a checklist of things that you go through to see if something is newsworthy. And that is, I mean, and they don't have to meet all of these, but they're going to meet some of them. Timeliness. Okay, did it happen pretty recently? Impact, does it have an effect on our community? Proximity, does it have an effect on the people right around us? I mean, and that's the, one person is injured in a car crash in Lawrence, and that's news. 50 people die in a bus crash in Paraguay, and it's like maybe that much on an inside page, just because of proximity. Not that those weren't, 50 important people to the people who loved them, but they're half a world away. So that proximity is important also. Sometimes conflict is news. If there's two sides and they're kind of battling it, a lot of political news is this way. Some of it probably shouldn't be framed that way. If something is unusual, out of the ordinary, that can be newsworthy. Excuse me, and prominence. Does it involve a prominent person? And this is when I tell my students, okay, if you get an MIP, it's not news. If a basketball player does, it's news, okay, because they're more prominent, okay. If I get fined for a zoning violation on my property, it's not news. If Bill Self does, it's news. And that's because, some people are more prominent than others. And it's just a little bit more newsworthy because people are interested in that. And interest, like human interest. And so this is where a lot of the good news stories come in, because people are interested in good news stories. People are interested in people make a difference in the community, nice things that are happening, and some people call those puff pieces or, fluffer stories, but they're not. They're important things also, because people like to know what's going on in their community. New businesses opening. Okay, yeah, that's timely. It's got an impact on the community. It's proximate. It's right here. That's going to be newsworthy, because we all want to know, hey, what's going into that space on Mass Street? That's news. That's news too. And sometimes it does seem like there's bad things because people are really interested in crime. People want to know, oh, why did that siren just go by Hazlitt's house? What's going on? did somebody get stabbed downtown? Okay, I would kind of like to know that, and I would like to know the circumstances surrounding that, because it's very different if it was a fight between two people or a random attack on someone. If there are hate crimes going on, I think we want to know that that's happening in our community, and we want to be aware of that and take steps to prevent things like that. And so, yeah, sometimes it seems a little more skewed to bad news because that is, it's the out of the ordinary thing, which is kind of a good thing that that's not happening every day. But it does sometimes seems like it focuses a little bit on that just because it's something different happening. So, sorry, that was kind of a long answer to your question, David. But yeah, and part of it even now is on the internet, on our website, we can see what people read. Like even for the University of Daly Kansan, we have an analytics program that tells us, okay, how many page views have we had today? How many visitors have we had today? Which story has had the most views? And we can tell what people like to read and what people don't like to read. And that goes for any publication, TV station, anybody who's got a website, you can tell what do people read and what do they ignore. And so you kind of think of, well, okay, my audience really likes these stories, so maybe let's do a couple more. Gee, no one cared about this one. Well, and some of it is what we call the broccoli news, like you really need it, whether a lot of people read it or not. We really need stories that are, what are they doing with taxpayer money, things like that aren't really very sexy stories, but you do need to put that out there because people do need to know that kind of stuff. And then there's kind of the fun stories, the new businesses opening, and coverage of the county fair with lots of pictures of cute little kids eating cotton candy and animals. Okay, everybody loves that. Things like that. So it's got to be kind of a balance. It's got to be kind of a balance there. So back to reliable sources. I promised there would be more. These are people who are in a position to know information, okay, and to know it firsthand. And that doesn't necessarily mean an eyewitness, somebody who was there. It may mean an eyewitness, somebody who was there, but it may also mean an official whose job it is to keep track of the county budget, to know where the power outages are, those kinds of, sort of more official sources, like people who work there and it's their job to know these things. Some of it is experts, scientists who study these things, people who are just an expert in whatever it is that you're reporting on, who can say, oh, there's no way a chimney could catch a house on fire if it was 10 feet away. So it's got to be something else. Those kinds of things. So not necessarily a scientist, often a scientist, not always, doctors, sometimes it's police and fire investigators who understand how the process works for something like that. Maybe it's an engineer who could talk about, okay, here's a building and this is why it isn't structurally sound anymore. Somebody who works for KDOT and can tell you about, the tensile strength of concrete, which is important if there has been a wreck on the turnpike where something caught fire and burned for a while. Did it damage the roadbed? Okay, you need to talk to somebody like that. So, you find who would know these kinds of things and you talk to them. And you talk to them and you have them explain, okay, what do you know about this? What do you know kind of about the bigger picture? What questions are our readers going to have that you could answer for them? Okay, because I don't know anything about the tensile strength of concrete on the turnpike and how a fire might affect it, but I'll go find somebody who does, who can explain that to us. Okay, and so we attribute everything that a reporter did not personally see. Okay, so if a reporter went out and covered a house fire and watched the house burn down, they don't need to attribute that because they were there and they watched it. Okay, but if they didn't get there right at the beginning, they're going to have to talk to people to say, oh yeah, we saw the flames at 2:30 and we called 911 right away, and boy, they were here really quickly. Okay, maybe I didn't get there till 3 o'clock, and so I'm kind of picking up, okay, some eyewitnesses, maybe something from the fire department, something from the survivors whose house it was if they want to talk, that kind of thing. So you're pulling together a lot of different pieces of the story to give readers the complete picture here. And the complete picture a lot of times is more than two sides. I mean, I think we get a lot of both sidesism, especially with political news, which is often very unfortunate because, a lot of times, even with political news, especially with political news, I would say, is that, it's always framed as conflict. That's the news value. It's conflict. It's two sides, butting heads against each other, trying to, get their win is really what they want. And I think a lot of times what gets lost in some political coverage is who's actually affected by this legislation, who's affected by this lack of legislation. And how does this affect everyday people? How does this affect different groups of everyday people? That sometimes, that gets lost in the shouting, depending on which cable news channel you watch. If you actually read coverage of it in a more in-depth kind of setting, you'll probably get a better story. But that's not as exciting. It's not as sexy as people yelling about, do we want this or do we want that? Or how can you raise taxes on the middle class? We're not raising taxes on the middle class. An argument is a little bit more interesting, but a good story is going to involve everybody. And it's going to start with those questions. It's going to start with a question. I'm trying to find answers. What does this mean for? What actually happened? Is this everything that happened? What else happened? And we don't publish until we verify. All right, we don't publish until we verify. And a lot of times something that you have to verify is an anonymous source. And there are pretty strict rules at most publications about when you use anonymous sources, because people can tell you stuff sometimes and like their name's not on it. So what's their angle? And there's really good reasons sometimes where you want a source to be anonymous. Lots of times victims of sex crimes, they don't want their name all over the internet. I get that. Victims of child abuse, same thing. That's fine. Whistleblowers who might lose their job or might be actually physically threatened. All right, there's a reason for that. But even with an anonymous source, generally more than the reporter knows. So the reporter is going to know who this person is. Their boss, their editor, is going to know who that is, and they're going to try and independently confirm pretty much everything that person says, just to make sure that, yeah, we've got the whole picture here. And when that breaks down, that's when you get a story that has to get retracted because it wasn't quite right, because people didn't check, because people didn't verify that. And how do we get the verification? A lot of this is the editing process. Okay, journalism isn't just somebody going out, writing something down and throwing it up on a blog or a website. The big difference here in professional journalism is that there's editing, and it's not always like after the fact. We have assigning editors who basically say, hey, the scanner just went off and there's a house fire, and they send someone out to do it. See if you can get the cause, or, this is the third one this week on that block. Is there a problem with the gas main or something like that? And when the reporter comes back and files a story, the assigning editor basically looks at the content and says, okay, look, there's a big hole in the story. You really should have talked to this person to get these questions answered. So go do that and then file it again. So they're kind of looking at the big picture. Is everybody that needs to be in the story in the story? Are there no big questions that are unanswered? That kind of thing. This is also why in a lot of stories, you'll see a sentence that says something like, so-and-so could not be reached for comment, or so-and-so did not return phone call seeking comment. Okay, and you might be thinking, why did they put that in there if they did not talk to that person? Well, we put that in there because we want you to know that we tried to talk to that person. We were trying to give that person an opportunity to comment, but they didn't want to. And we thought you should know that we at least tried, because we knew you might want to know what they had to say, but they didn't want to say anything. So that's why those kinds of lines are in there, basically to let you know that we tried, that we knew you'd want to know what they had to say. We tried to find out what they wanted to say. They didn't want to say anything to us. Okay, then. After that part is all finished, it's going to head to the copy editor. And that's pretty much what I did when I worked in newspapers. This is more of the kind of the fine-tooth comb editing. We check the facts. We make sure that the news is at the top and that it isn't halfway down the story, which is called burying the lead. It's like, whoa, you read, and you're like, whoa, that's the news. Okay, no, that should go first. we make sure that the grammar and spelling and punctuation is correct, largely correct. Not everything gets fixed sometimes. Copy editors have kind of a big job, and there's a lot fewer of them than there used to be, which is why I put the largely free from mistakes in there, because it used to be, there were a bunch of us and we were combing over stories and we had one reading behind the other just to make sure that we caught everything. And copy was pretty flawless. Now there may be one person, handling copy for an entire publication without any help, and on a fairly tight deadline. So stuff does slip through sometimes, but the fact checking comes first. The fact checking part of this comes first. And everything that can get checked gets checked. Everything that we can check. And that is names, dates, times, locations. If we hear that the boat stuck in the Suez Canal was as long as the Empire State Building is tall, by golly, we're going to check that fact. It was true. I did check it. Even though somebody said it on the news and I'm like, really? And I looked it up and I'm like, oh yeah, really? Wow. That kind of thing. It's the first time since whenever that canal traffic was shut down. Well, I'm checking that. Okay, so things like that. The biggest, the smallest, the most, the least, we check those. Okay, things like that. And how do we check that? You check it with everything you have at your disposal. Okay, I mean, you look at official websites to check names, check titles. So if I've got somebody identified as the CEO of a company, I'm going to check their name on the website. And I'm going to make sure they're the CEO and not the CFO. I'm going to look at government records. I'm going to check, maybe property records about something, tax records. There's a lot of records that are open that everybody, not just journalists, has a right to see. So things like that, financial, legal documents. A publicly traded corporation has a lot of paperwork on file with SEC. So if there are stockholders in a company, there's a ton of stuff that is knowable about that company. Court documents, if you're looking for, if you're checking out to see when someone was arrested, when were they in jail, you can find that out. Sometimes you look at past news coverage. It's like, oh yeah, we covered the first, here's a follow-up and we covered this last week. Okay, let's make sure that those things match. And if they don't, we're going to talk to somebody and find out why it says this here, but it said this other thing last week, which one's right? Or maybe it was right at the time, or maybe that was what we knew at the time and it changed. Okay, that sometimes happens too. Sometimes you have to actually ask a source. Like, hey, last week you told us, that your store was opening the 1st of April, but the story I have today says the 15th. Oh yeah, we needed an extra couple of weeks to do whatever. Okay, great, put that in there then. We'll do that. And sometimes you have to dig pretty deep. You cross-check photos and videos, make sure they are what they say they are, that they are when they say they are. That's digging a little bit deeper, but there are some times when you actually have to do that. You have to see, okay, is this really London? Is this really, Ukraine? Is it, these kinds of things. And there are some people who their whole job is like really digging into photos and videos that are posted places to try and track things down. There's a KU grad who works for a company called Bellingcat. It's an investigative journalism site based in Europe, although he's here in the US. And sorry about that. He does a lot of like crawling through metadata of photos and videos to see when these were taken and using all this kind of embedded information and then geolocation and stuff like that to find things out. He looks a lot at like the Ukraine-Russia conflict and things like that. It's really interesting. Lots of stuff that he does. That's like major league investigation, fact-checking kind of stuff. That's not what most daily journalists do, but still, it's pretty cool. And a couple of other standards that are kind of, just sort of general ethical policies that we have to follow is that we avoid conflicts of interest. All right, if my mom owns a business, I can't cover anything about that business. Okay, You know, if my brother is in the police department, I'm not covering the police department. It just doesn't work that way. We don't support political candidates. We can vote, but no yard signs, no bumper stickers, no advocacy for a candidate or anything like that. Sorry about that. My trees are pollinating. Getting a little sniffy today. Yeah, things like that. So can't do that. Also, acknowledging and correcting errors. Legitimate news outlets will say, we screwed up. We're going to fix this for you. They're going to describe how they did. They're going to describe how they did a story. So if there's a big like data investigation where they pulled a bunch of records and dug through it looking for information, they'll tell you how they did that. And the newest part of journalism, which is, again, really kind of a good thing, it's been helpful for journalism. The audience gets to talk back now. It's not just like we throw a newspaper on your lawn in the morning, you read it and that's it. Maybe if you're mad, you write a letter to the editor. Or if we screw up the crossword puzzle, you call the office at 8 o'clock in the morning and let us know. That's honestly the surest fire way to hear from your subscribers is like screw up the puzzles. Because yeah, you'll get calls. Your boss's boss's boss will get calls about if the puzzle screwed up somehow. But yeah, it's not just like, oh yeah, and if you have a tip, call us. No, there's comments, there's ways to engage on social media. Hey, what about this? How come you didn't talk to so-and-so for this? And because a lot of times, most of the news is published online, you know what, we can go back and fix it. We can go back and add that. And that's a good thing. It's good to get, you know, even if it's like, hey, there's a typo in paragraph 3. Okay, yeah, oops, let's fix that. But yeah, we listen now to the audience, which makes, I think, journalism stronger. I think it makes our stories better. I think it makes our coverage more thorough and more responsive to the needs of the audience. And that's a good thing. I think that's a good thing. So here's an example of a correction, which I think is hilarious. This is from NBC News. They tweeted that ISIS fighters were shaving bears and hiding in civilian homes. And of course, it was beards, not bears. They didn't take their tweet down. They corrected it right there underneath, and they're like, yeah, whoops. I mean, it's just kind of funny to think about ISIS shaving bears. I mean, it's just kind of a funny typo. And they knew it, and they're like, okay, yeah. Here's one that was in the Journal World. This was from last year sometime. They ran a column in their home and garden section about poison ivy with a picture of a plant that was not poison ivy. And so they heard about that. And then they reran the column and they said why. The photo that accompanied the story did not depict poison ivy. And they ran a new picture that was poison ivy with that. So yay. So now we know how to look for poison ivy, which is kind of important because poison ivy grows around here. There's poison ivy in my yard that I have to pull out. And nobody wants poison ivy, but you need to know what it looks like if you're going to deal with something like that. So yeah, they are transparent. They were like, whoops, we screwed up. Here you go. Sometimes it's just an editor's note. Okay. And we're going to say that we did use anonymous sources in this story, and here's why we're making them anonymous. Okay. This is in accordance with our ethics policy, and we're going to link to it here. So you can go ahead and read our whole ethics policy. And it's just sort of like, yeah, we know you might be a little skeptical if we're using anonymous sources here. We're going to tell you why we did that. And we're going to show you our ethics policy too, just so you know that. And that's okay. That's good. Or you may just get something like this, which was, why did we report on this? What did the reporting process look like? How did we choose these things? This is sort of like a little process, box that we would call a box with it because it's in a little square next to the story. But it's sort of like, okay, here's the story and here's this whole, investigation piece. Okay, why did we do it? How did we do it? How did we choose these things? And we're going to tell you how we worked on that. So you know, because we know you might have questions about that. So we'll help you understand this too. And this is a pretty recent development, sort of the explainer box about how we did it. I think it's a really good thing. I think because data reporting in particular can get really complicated. It takes a long time. And, you know, sometimes people don't quite understand the process that you have to go through to find this information. And explaining that, you know, yeah, we had to file a public records request, then we had to do lots of math. And here's how we did that and what we found. So I think that's a pretty good development too, that we explain things. Are there questions at this point? Anybody? We okay?
Oh, we just got one actually.
Yay.
Oh, I had this question too, David. So it seems like fact checking could take weeks. How is it done under deadline? Is it ever outsourced? How long does it take in general?
It could actually, you could go down a rabbit hole pretty easily with stuff. It sort of depends on a daily publication. I mean, you're not going to have to do a ton of in-depth fact checking most of the time because the stories are not that long. If it's a longer sort of investigative piece, they're going to be working on it a little bit longer. And so fact checking often happens in stages. You know, that there's, okay, here's all this stuff. You know, they don't just throw a pile of documents on the editor's desk, you know, 2 hours before deadline, or if they do, then that's a recipe for disaster. And I have been in a newsroom where that happened and it was a disaster. Because yeah, then the fact checking is no good. Places like, you know, the New Yorker and Rolling Stone, when they run these big investigative pieces, I mean, those take months to do. And magazines, sort of the really good news magazines who run news investigations and things like that, they have fact checkers. They have professional fact checkers. Some of them have a fact checker that is in-house. Sometimes they hire freelance fact checkers that's their job. And so they're really good at it. And the fact checkers, sometimes they are calling people, they call sources, they call neighbors, they call bosses, they call coworkers. So it's not just like looking stuff up in books. Sometimes it's actually going to a place to check something. More than once when I was copy editing, I called phone numbers to make sure that they were accurate. I called businesses to ask what is your actual name, because your sign and the phone book and your listing with the county don't match. You know, those kinds of things. I have literally gone to a location to check a building. You know, and again, if you're at a local newspaper and you're downtown and the building is downtown and you only have to walk a block, sometimes it's a little break to get out of the office. But yeah, I mean, there's lots of ways that you can do it. It's way easier with the internet. You can let it take forever. You get pretty good at it. Like my students in advanced editing, I told them at the beginning of the semester, okay, the first time you get a sports story, it's going to take you like your entire editing shift to go through it, because you're going to be checking everything and you're going to, you know, you're going to be not knowing where to look all this stuff up. And by now in this semester, they're like, oh, I edited this sports story and then this and this and this. Because you get good at knowing where the information is. You get accustomed to, okay, I know where to go to find this, and it's only going to take me a couple minutes to look this up. Whereas the first time I had to find this piece of information, I didn't know where to go. I hit a couple of dead ends. It took me a half hour to check one fact. But now I know where to go, so it doesn't take me that long anymore. And yeah, I mean, it's most of the time you're not going to get something that's really going to involve digging into metadata on a video and geolocating things. That's kind of fun, but that doesn't really happen most of the time in daily journalism. But there are times when something doesn't match and something doesn't add up, and you've got to hold a story because it's like, this, we're not ready for this. I can't find, this is only half the story, or this is only half of this piece of information. I can't verify the rest of this. Where did this come from? So yeah, sometimes stories get held because they're just not quite there yet. When they get rushed, it's usually the result is not good. You know, there are big corrections, retractions. That's never what you want. That's never what you want.
Lisa, I just have a follow-up question. Is that sort of fact checking a thing that you learn in journalism school? Like, do students learn, like, here are all the possible sources of information, and or how do people go about digging for those things in the first place?
Yeah, we teach that. I mean, we have 2 levels of editing classes in the J school. We have an intro to editing and an advanced editing. And in intro to editing, they learn, lots of fact checking, pretty much the basics of, check everything, just check it, check the math. You have to add things up, get your calculator out. Here's where to check this, here's where to check this. Before they even get to that editing class, they've had an information literacy class where they learn about public records and data and things like that. So before they're really actually fact checking a story, they learn how to find facts, and a lot of sources that are available for that. And then in advanced editing, my advanced editing class actually just not next week, but the week after, we're diving pretty deep into fact checking, like, yeah, really doing some of the metadata, geolocation, stuff like that, where you can really tell, okay, has somebody let's look at this a couple of different ways. How can you find out whether something is a bot on Twitter? Tracking way back to find an original source of information and stuff like that. So yeah, we teach them that. You can learn it on the job. That's how I did it. I learned it on the job. And some of it is trial and error. Some of it is just learning to look pretty skeptically at everything and make sure that you've got an answer for everything. So yeah, it can take a really long time. Most of the time in daily journalism, it does not take that long. So there were just a couple of things that I wanted to make sure that everybody knew the difference of, the difference between news and analysis. News is basically, here's what happened. And we're going to try and pull together a lot of different reports of what, or, information sources for what happened to give you the whole story of what happened. Analysis is going to look a little bit more deeply at what happened with more interpretation or looking at a trend. And a lot of times you'll get an expert in there. Okay. And so this is the difference between, here are the COVID numbers for today or this week, or, the COVID numbers are up here in Kansas or down here in Kansas, or, we're just looking at raw numbers. The analysis is going to be when you get doctors, epidemiologists, public health people in to say, okay, what is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What do we need to know about this? What can we do about this? What does this information actually tell us? So we've got this information. What do we need to do about it? Okay. And then opinion is more commentary from a particular viewpoint. Okay. Analysis is actually going to look at the news and have an expert say, okay, this is what it might mean in terms of a trend or something like this. Opinion is going to say, well, we need to open everything up. Well, we shouldn't have opened everything back up, kind of thing. And a good opinion piece will use facts to back up their argument, will argue logically. A bad opinion piece, a weak opinion piece, will use lots of logical fallacies. They will cherry pick their facts. And there's a lot of weak commentary going on out there, particularly on TV. So take it with a grain of salt. Realize that people are going to be furthering their own agenda. They may be picking only the few facts that support their agenda. They may not be considering other viewpoints or even acknowledging other viewpoints. And while it might be entertaining, it's not very informative. Okay. There's a guide to news source reliability called adfontsmedia.com. And here, let me go to a new share. Do that. All right, can you see a website here?
Yep,
this is the chart. Okay, this is the interactive media bias chart. And as you can see, things pop up and little windows pop up. So what this thing does, I'll pop the link into the chat for you. This basically rates news sources by how far left are they, how far right are they, how reliable are they, how unreliable are they. Okay, so right here in the middle, you have something like CNET, which does technology, the Weather Channel. Okay, really not biased politically there. It's weather. You know, and they're very reliable. They have scientists on there talking about hurricanes. We've got What's News, we've got the BBC, we've got the Wall Street Journal, we've got NBC, we've got the Dispatch, we've got Foreign Policy Magazine. So you get these ones that are clustered up here, and these are going to be in this green box are your legit news sources, okay, that are pretty much going to be, they may be skewed to the left, they may be skewed to the right, but as long as they're kind of up here in the green box, they have a mix of facts and analysis or factual reporting or even original factual reporting, which means they don't rely on AP or Reuters, they go out and do their own, okay. As you get a little bit more over here, you're going to get a little bit more political bias. So if you're looking at like Daily Kos, it's really Democratic, very over here. But you're also going down here. You're moving away from factual reporting into not as reliable stuff, lots of opinion, very selective. You know, cherry picking here. They're trying to persuade you. It's a little bit on the propaganda side. So we've got some podcasts and things over here. Then down you get into, you know, misleading and then downright, you know, fake news way here at the bottom. This gets updated pretty recently. You can actually search this one. You can go through and look at it. This is a really handy tool. And there's filters and stuff that you can use. I won't go into quite how to use that. But it's a pretty handy tool to determine whether the source that you're looking at is reliable. If you don't have a librarian around who can help you, because let's see here, there we went. Because the librarian can actually help you. Whoops, I missed that. Let me go stop. Sorry about that. There we are. You may not always have access to the internet. If your librarian may help you, okay? I would say, you know, your daily actual physical print newspaper, reliable source, all right? Think about your big 3 TV networks, not MSNBC, regular NBC, not MSNBC, CBS, ABC, okay? The ones that have your nightly news on at 5:30, okay? Those are gonna be really reliable sources. Your local news channels, okay? Your Channel 5 out of Kansas City, Channel 13 out of Topeka, okay? Those are gonna give you local news. They're out there, they're gathering the news, they're checking it out, they're bringing it to you. They are gonna be fine. Okay, pretty much your traditional legacy media are generally okay on these things. All right, the cable news channels, careful about that. Okay, because they mix opinion and news programming in. Okay, if you're just watching just a straight up news show on MSNBC, CNN, even Fox News, you know, they've got some daytime news programs that are just news. They're fine. Okay, it's when you get into the commentary that you're going to, you know, have people, you know, being a little cherry picking, definitely have an agenda going in there, even dipping into really misleading, incomplete news, I'll put that in quotes, information for people. So careful about that. And if you're not sure, you can plug your thing in here. This is just a static looking one that doesn't move, but some are over there. Interestingly enough, if you look at, here's natural news here, and there's a couple of ones over here that are kind of health focused, and I should put health in air quotes too, because you might think that political news is the most faked news on social media. It's health news. It's health information that is most often really bad, unreliable, fake information. And that's because so many people are trying to sell you something. They're trying to sell you books. They're trying to sell you supplements. They're trying to sell you services. You know, and they want you to subscribe to their plan or buy their book or get their vitamins or whatever. There's a lot of money in that. And if you can scare somebody into thinking that, you know, onion pills cure cancer and they're only $20 as opposed to, you know, your $600 a month chemo, some people believe that. And yeah, it's big business out there. A lot of fake news is out there because people make money from it. Even during elections, a lot of, especially during the 2016 election, a lot of the fake news sites that were really kind of ginning up links that they were serving up on social media, Facebook and Twitter, every click that their link got, they got like a penny or something from the ads that were on their site, and they made hundreds of thousands of dollars just because people clicked stuff. And they were in Macedonia. They didn't give a rat's patoot who won our election. They just wanted traffic to their website because they made money from it. And they realized that hyper-partisan content got more people to click, so that's what they served up. They didn't care. They just wanted their penny for every viewer. They got it. So it is on all of us. All right. Legitimate news outlets do follow standards. Unreliable news outlets do not. But they're all out there and they all look the same. So it's all of us who have to take the responsibility to make sure we're getting information from a legit site. And there's a few red flags. I know we're about out of time, but I'll show you a few of these real quick here. If you see an all caps headline, if you see information in a meme on social media that's just an image with text and there's no source and there's no link, that is shady. Okay, do not trust information that you see in memes. All right, and we probably all have that relative who gets all their news from memes on Facebook and shares them and is like, OMG, can you believe this? Yeah, you're laughing. I know, we all have one. Don't trust any information you get from a meme. Okay, if it's a cat picture, great. Okay, that is what memes should be for, is for cat pictures. Okay, and little funny jokes, but not actual news. Okay, anytime you see a lot of hyperbole, lots of superlatives, the best, the most, the worst, you'll never believe this. Okay, partisan name calling, any headline that looks like it's designed to make you mad. Okay, is it purposefully making you mad? The government is poisoning your water. You know, the teachers don't want your kids to learn. Those kinds of headlines, just don't go there. Interestingly enough, lots of grammar and language errors because they don't have editors. Okay, they just throw any old stuff up on their website and they don't care if it's really sloppily written. Some people won't notice, some people do. And chances are if something is written that atrociously, it's not a legitimate site. Couple of other quick things to check. Check when an article was published or when a photo was taken. And this is kind of interesting too, because sometimes certain things sort of surface on the internet that people are like, oh my God, I can't believe this happened. And it's like, the story's from 2016. I mean, yeah, it happened, but it happened like 5 years ago. So don't get all mad about it again because it's over and done with. Actually read the story and see if what's in the story is actually what the headline says it is. And people tend to write sensationalistic headlines a little bit because they want people to click, but a lot of people don't actually click on the headlines. About half the people just scroll through headlines and never click on anything. Which means that, you know, as journalists, we're very careful about how we write headlines. We write headlines almost now with the assumption that people aren't going to read the story. I mean, you sort of go in assuming that they're not going to read the story and you hope they will, instead of assuming that they are going to read the story, which means your headlines have to be complete and they have to be accurate and they have to really reflect what's going on in the story. Look at the web address. Sometimes bad actors will fake a website and make it look like something that it isn't. All right. But if you look at the actual thing that comes up in the little bar in your browser, if it isn't, you know, like NBCnews.com, but if it's NB3news.com, that's a tell for you. That's a tell that this may not be legit. And that's also really good to look at for like possible scams, because a lot of times people will park on a website that's like one digit off or one letter off from a really popular website and make it look like that website, and you think you're there, and then you put your credit card in and then boom, they stole your number. So that's just kind of in general, be skeptical about that. Also look at the intent. Is what somebody has written supposed to be satire or a joke? Okay, I mean, we all know The Onion is satirical, But there are other sort of satirical websites out there that if you look like right at the top, it'll say satire. But people don't look at that always, and they see a headline, they freak out, they share it, and it's like, no, that's not real, it's satire. And I heard somebody say that satire is now dead because this is the age of, misinformation and outrageousness, and satire just doesn't even work anymore. That's a different argument, but those websites still do exist. And check your own biases. Does what you believe affect your judgment about something? Because it probably does, because people are more likely to believe things that confirm their existing beliefs. They're more likely to rate a news story as reliable when it confirms something that they already believe, even if it isn't real. So stop and say, okay, look, am I believing this just because I think it should be true? Or am I believing this because it comes from a reliable source? And so how can you do this? You can check and see if somebody else has already fact-checked it. Check Snopes, check factcheck.org. A lot of times, some of the more outlandish claims have already been fact-checked. So that's all you have to do. Yay, you're done. If they've already done it. If maybe they haven't, see if you can find the original source of the information. Okay, is the original source of the information someone's blog in a dark corner of the internet? Probably not reliable. Is the original source of information, excuse me, an article in Scientific American? Probably reliable. Is the article from Scientific American accurately represented in the headline? Maybe not. Read the article and see. Read the article and see. And if you can't find that, see who else has the story. I mean, if it's a big breaking news story, pretty quick after it happens, several outlets will have it. And if no one else has it anywhere, then see, okay, where am I reading this? And, just Google, is whatever.com legitimate? And results will usually come up for you. This does involve a little bit of work. We do have to be skeptical, all right? We have to check things, check the date, read the story, find the original source. You may have to do a little bit of digging. That's okay. That's part of our responsibility now as media consumers. So what you can do, familiarize yourself with the reliable outlets. Be very skeptical of information that you see in memes that is not cute little kittens chasing butterflies or puppies barking at themselves in the mirror or something. Look for the red flags. See if somebody's already fact-checked it. Lots of times that'll just save you a lot of trouble. But do check it before you share it. Just before you click share, do a little bit of digging and make sure that this is information that is really legit, that you want to share. And if you're not 100% sure about it, don't share it. Just don't. Stop the spread of misinformation yourself, and don't click it if it's not legit. So anyway, we've had a small group tonight, but thanks for coming. I do appreciate that. Are there more questions?
Oh, here we go. Okay, we've got another one. So what would you prescribe as a healthy news diet? If I have a half hour a day to stay informed, where should I spend that time? Should I include something that challenges my biases? What a good question.
Yes, that is an excellent question. Yeah, I would say that a healthy news diet includes national and international news as well as local news. Okay, and really the best way, if you're kind of on a time budget, is to subscribe to a couple of email newsletters. And these are kind of like morning headlines or something like that. I get entirely too many of them in a day, probably way more than you want. But yeah, I think your balanced news diet includes good local information. The Lawrence Journal-World has a morning headlines email. They've got good stuff every morning. If you don't subscribe to the newspaper, which you probably should, but if you don't want to, that's okay. I know that. You can subscribe to their email newsletter even if you don't subscribe to the newspaper. You can't read everything on there. You'll hit a paywall after a click or two. But at least you'll get the headlines and a little summary about that. Then for national news, There are a lot of news outlets that you can subscribe to a newsletter from. One of the ones that I think is really interesting is from Quartz, which is kind of a business-centered publication. But what I really like about Quartz's morning email newsletter is that they have like 5 things from their own website about, and it's global too. And I don't really care about global business and finance, so I usually skip those. I kind of read the headlines, and then they'll go in depth on one more thing, and then they have a whole section every morning of like what we liked elsewhere. And so they'll pull things from other news sources that they just think are kind of interesting and newsworthy. And so they'll pull from, you know, the BBC and Reuters and the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post, maybe CNN. You know, they'll pull from whatever, you know, and they're legit news sources too. Sometimes it's a little more sciencey and they'll do something from a more sciencey kind of publication or whatever, but it's mostly newsy stuff. And
Can
then
you say again what the name of that one was?
yeah, it's called Quartz.
Thank you. Okay.
And then they have a matters for debate section, which is sort of, you know, more analysis / opinion pieces. I really like it. Every morning there is something that I click on from Quartz. If you want straight up news, you can, you know, pick the New York Times, pick the Washington Post. Those are going to be reliable sources. Wall Street Journal has one, but all their articles are paywalled. So if you're not a subscriber, you can't read them. If you really want to read them, subscribe or read it at the library. You know, that I think is really kind of a good way to get a variety of stuff. And that way, yeah, you could actually subscribe to a couple of ones that are maybe a little bit, you know, maybe a little bit on the other side of, excuse me, of what you normally do. Like, yeah, maybe go ahead and get the Wall Street Journal's email newsletter, even if you're not going to read the articles, just to see what they're covering. You know, maybe National Review for more think piece kind of things. That's going to be a little bit maybe on the other side. Or get the Atlantic if you want to move something a little bit more to the left, that'll work too. But yeah, if you want something really light, there's something that my students all read called The Skim, which is a daily email newsletter, which is definitely written for like younger people. You can tell by the tone. But what they do is they pull together really good news. I mean, good, legit news source news. And what they'll do is a lot of times they'll say, okay, here's this, you know, you may have heard there's a boat stuck in the Suez Canal, but here's a little bit more about this. And they may link to 5 or 6 stories. It'll give you different perspectives on what's going on. So, you know, for as breezy as the tone is, the news is really solid in that newsletter. So, you know, that's one that I don't feel bad at all that my students read, because they're getting a pretty good news diet from that, even though it looks like candy, there's broccoli in the middle.